Lord Seventh, is a priest novel. This is an audiobook made by fans for other fans. Disclaimer. The main couple of the story is made up of two men. If you don't like it, don't listen. Thank you. Remember, subscribe and click the bell to stay updated on all the new releases. Enjoy. Chapter 9. A raised foot carries weight. Jing had always been one whose natural looks were comparatively advantageous, especially since he always brought a modest smile when meeting someone. Whenever he smiled, the corners of his eyes and tips of his brows both curved up, making him look particularly sincere, and particularly charming. Wuxia was currently indifferently listening to Ch09 politely make small talk. All he felt was that the people here, regardless of whether their heart was true or feelings were false, and regardless of how much hatred they had for the other party when they met face to face, they would inevitably adopt a smiling face and give pleasantries like they were real. It was extremely fake and senseless. He turned his head back as if he had somewhat sensed exactly that, just so happening to catch sight of that Prince Nanning the Emperor had talked about heading over. For some reason, Jing was suddenly unable to keep hanging that smile on his face from the other's glance sweeping over him. Everyone had said that Nanjiang was a wild land, its people uncivilized and no different than beasts that passed their days devouring raw meat and drinking blood. The instant that Nanjiang kid saw him coming over, there was obvious tension and guarding in his form, and he turned a half step to the side to size him up, as if he had seen through with one glance that he wasn't at all as benevolent and harmless as he appeared to be. Jing understood that the beastling-esque child also had beastling-esque intuition, and he could make out who was good, who was being superficial, and who harbored bad intentions. He touched his nose with a bit of awkwardness, and cupped his fist towards Ch09 before anything else. Sir Chen went through a lot of trouble for my father's funeral arrangements some time ago. This Beiyuan is truly quite humbled to be able to pay my thanks in your presence. The Emperor misses the senior prince. This humble official was merely sharing the monarch's tribulations as such, and doesn't dare to take credit. May you also not overly grieve, Prince. Ch09 half lowered his head. This way, please, gentlemen. Great Consul Harold Ch09 was like a crackless egg. A character like he was glossy on all sides, neither close nor distant with anyone. The two horseflies that were the eldest and second scions both wanted to bite the celebrity that the emperor valued, but sadly hadn't yet found a place to do so far. Even Crown Prince Helianyi would someday faintly cling to the inclination of drumming him up. His own few, vaguely flattering phrases had been succinctly deflected by the receiving side, as he also wore on his head the reputation of being loyal to the monarch, being fond of the nation, and being awe-inspiringly righteous. Jing wasn't mad, either, mentally having something of an understanding of the Sir Consul Harold. He turned to Wuxia, but took away the feigned smile from his face. All of you have just recently arrived at the capital city, and there are a good deal of trifles pertaining to food, clothing, residence, and travel that Sir Chen will be troubled to arrange for. This prince will overstep my bounds to lead mine emperor in entertaining all you esteemed guests, using the utmost of a host's hospitality. When there was no smile on this boy's face, he suddenly had such an unusual, cool-headed temperament. There was even a split second where Wuxia thought that he had a bit of similarity to the great shaman Faraway in Nanjiang, and he couldn't help but be stunned, the fine-spun hostility he had receding by a good margin. Following what Ch09 had said, he asked him an utterly natural question. Is your father dead? The word dead was unlucky, violating taboo in and of itself, and as the one he spoke of was the former Prince Nanning, it was even more greatly disrespectful. Ch09 paused, then carefully peered at Jing extremely fearful that this filterless, southern barbarian Chaminette had offended the little prince. In Chen Yuanshan's view, though Prince Nanning was young, he had been raised in the palace since he was a child and grew up together with the scions, and that was mixed with the friendship between the senior prince and the emperor, or owed to those noble folks' romance back in the day that no one knew how to react to. In any case, all people with working eyes could see that despite him presently having no power or authority, to Emperor Helian Pei, he was nevertheless more favored than his three biological sons. The Chaminette was awkward in his position of hostage as of now, and his personality also didn't seem to be a great match, having freshly arrived and already antagonized the eldest scion's party. If Prince Nanning was added onto that, he then really wouldn't be itching if he had too much lice, nor worrying about having too many heads. Just as he was wanting to mediate, he saw Jing nod like it didn't matter. For more than a year. Oh, that's a long time. Wuxia looked at him in apparent understanding. No wonder regarding your father's death, I saw you didn't seem grieving at all. So it's actually been such a long time. Chen Yuanshan shut up. He thought that this Chaminette was just like a curious child that didn't know how tall the sky and deep the earth was. He had reached out to slap a tiger on the ass, and the half-asleep, half-awake creature didn't feel like bothering with him, so he believed it to be fine to foolhardily twirl its beard. He was firmly convinced that if someone like him was able to peacefully live in this place in the future, it would be a medium-sized miracle. As expected, Jing-Chi slightly furrowed his brows, and countered with his own question. The 3-year mourning period has not yet been satisfied. Do you mean to say, Chaminette, that this prince is unfilial? See, even clay figurines had something of a temper, to say nothing of Prince Nanning, who was, in other words, a half-grown child himself. Chen Yuanshan wasn't sure what small stuff the emperor was sweating. Did he call for a child to coax a child, lest they wouldn't hit it off? He had no choice but to smile apologetically. A father and son are close by nature, where's the sense in the junior prince not grieving? It's merely that a wound on the heart is unlike a wound on the body, where it can be seen at a glance, as it's hidden entirely inside one's chest. Chaminette, isn't you saying that just injuring his sense of filial piety? Wuxia was taken aback for a second. I didn't mean that. I wasn't saying you're bad. He looked at Jing-Chi, thinking, then explained himself. Ashenli's father died during the war. He found his corpse and brought it back from the battlefield, carrying it home on his back. His little sister and mom both cried loudly. Though he didn't cry, we all could see his grief. The way you look is different from his. Jing-Chi was only verifying a child's skin, so it was, of course, impossible for him to bicker over these rubbish topics with Wuxia. Moreover, he found that this kid basically said whatever was on his mind, not much for beating around the bush. To say he was naive would be putting it nicely. In reality, he was a little stupid. Taking the mask off with a chuckle, Jing-Chi responded to him in no rush. After my late mother passed on, Father Prince, my father constantly missed her. In the opinion of those of us who are alive, the passing of family is a sorrowful matter, but in his opinion, it might have been a happy one. Wuxia nodded like he half understood, silent. He lowered his eyes, long lashes falling halfway down, as he appeared to be somewhat perplexed. Chen Yuanshan couldn't help but take another glance at Jing-Chi, though, thinking of how this Prince Nanning wasn't high up in age, yet his bearing was extraordinary. He observed him holding seemingly unbothered composure while he spoke, neither slow nor swift, as well as keeping his voice a bit lower, just enough to suppress the minor childishness it had due to his still being young. Not a drop of affectation was in any of his motions, a self-made behavior that something of an unrestrained air faintly permeated off of. He'd also heard that Prince Nanning had frequently been in and out of the East Palace since he was a toddler, and had quite a close personal friendship with His Highness the Crown Prince. Chen Yuanshan's mind whirred, vaguely getting a few plans. At that juncture, Jing Qi raised his head and smiled at him. Sir Chen, I recall that the post house doesn't seem to be far away. Chen Yuanshan startled, responding quickly. Yes. This humble official will go a step in advance to inform them, to avoid them neglecting our esteemed guests. Something like this didn't need Chen Yuanshan to step in for it, naturally, but Prince Nanning seemed to have something to say, and his expression had indicated that he didn't wish for him to be on the scene. Chen Yuanshan was an experienced person who thus noticed and comprehended, finding an excuse to bring himself away. After faintly pausing in his steps, Jing Qi's true colors came down. Chaminette, there are some words that might not be too appropriate for me to speak out. Wuxia raised his head to look at him. In our great Qing, boys come of age and are crowned at 20. After the rite, they become an adult, Jing Qi explained unhurriedly. If they're a child of an influential family, or are of scholarly rank in exams, then at 15 and up, they can enter court to listen in, as well as take a wife. The words I say after this are not what others would consider being a child's. Wuxia kind of didn't understand what he was trying to convey. The other shook his head, inclining his head to peer at him. Looking at him from a close range, Wuxia became a discoverer of Prince Nanning's prettiness. Every iota of his features were evenly akin to being finely carved, his skin had the special great Qing aristocrat's tenderness and fairness which arose from being raised in wealth, and his silhouette still had some of the callowness of a child. Yet, when he looked over at him, the look in his eyes could make one easily overlook those things, unable to restrain themselves from wanting to clearly hear what he was saying. Jing Qi nearly pushed his voice all the way down his throat, bringing a harsh aura out of thin air as he spoke. If you weren't at your age, if you weren't so important and renowned right now, dying 1,000 times wouldn't be enough for what you did today. Wuxi's eyes widened, staring blankly at him. As expected, he did not understand. Jing Qi narrowed his eyes and marginally raised his head to gaze at the horizon, his words whisper-like. This is your first day here, and there are some things you don't understand. The one who wanted to kill you today was eldest scion Helian Zhao. You messed with Minister Jian Saizong, who is the father of the prior's consort. Currently, the eldest scion's party is holding the sky up single-handedly in court, and even the crown prince is completely unimportant to him. If has the mind to bring harm to you. The other was quiet for a while before cutting him off. Why are you telling me these? Jing Qi smiled. Why would he tell the chaminette these words? Why did Helian Pei specifically find him to accompany this far-off visitor? The battle in court to snatch the spot of the legitimate son had already approached white-hot heat. Helian Zhao and Helian Qi were both already non-stop, unless for death. In Helian Pei's eyes, perhaps that youngest son of few words was truly unfit for the fate of crown prince or emperor, and even if he held the East Palace's rank, that was nothing more than a loincloth-like entity. Regardless of which son had the power to obtain the big seat in coming days, this youngest son, who had been the crown prince starting from birth, would certainly not be given any sort of good end. He typically put that son out of sight and out of mind, which was, in reality, a type of safeguard. For these past years, he wanted to make the older brothers see their little brother as a nobody who knew his lot in life, and able to let him go make his own way in life for the sake of not being favored. What kind of place was Nanjiang? Barren mountains, noxious waters, brave culture, and easy defense, difficult attack. As soon as the seasons of spring and summer came, the miasma would cause sickness. Even though Fen Yuanji had brought the great Qing's 400,000 elites over there, life after life had been lost inside. Helian Pei hadn't previously shown his face in court for over a year, and, for the purpose of specially welcoming the Chaminette, had specially called on the Crown Prince and in mourning at home Prince Nan Ning to come, that was to begin to pave an out for his youngest son. Maybe Helian Pei also knew that their so-called heyday was just a joke. He wasn't a turtle and couldn't live for 1,000,000 years, but once he died, wouldn't that youngster, still not yet grown, subsequently be buried next to him? Prince Nan Ning had been the study partner of the Crown Prince since they were young, and was usually friendly with Helian Yi. He was also about the same age as the Chaminette, so Helian Pei had intentionally called him over because he wanted the Crown Prince and Chaminette to be able to get closer. Childhood feelings would remain, and in the future, Nanjiang would be his escape route even if the journey was distant, and even if that place was a barbarian land that had not undergone civilization. It was just a pity that his good Crown Prince did not accept that situation. Jing Qi recalled that after Helian Pei had ultimately blurted out the lone word Yi, then suddenly remembered that Helian Yi had already left, exhaustion and disappointment flashing past his face. He couldn't help but sigh. Helian Pei was inherently not an all-powerful man. He couldn't contain the tendency for evil schemes every major official in court held, nor could he control the process of his son's fratricide, that might culminate in regicide, to steal the throne. All he had was a heart full of sincerity that only wanted to leave a life behind for his youngest. 7 lifetimes of reincarnation was 7 lifetimes of witnessing all sorts of sorrowful, lamentable, respectable, and despicable things, and they were also no more than a spot of emotion in the human world. Wuxia was still using that unforgiving-esque look full of alertness to stare at him with, his pupils terribly round, like a black kitten who had just puffed up and was desperately wishing to look mature plus a bit threatening. Jing Qi couldn't resist wanting to reach out in order to pat him on the head, but he remembered the huge loss Minister Jian suffered, so he awkwardly took his hand back to rub at his own chin. It was the Crown Prince's idea. The skin on his face had long been tempered to be invulnerable to weaponry in his previous lifetimes, and was rich and with thick, black quintessence. He told lies like it was eating food or drinking water, pushing the entire course of events onto Helian Yi without batting an eyelid. It was the Emperor's idea, anyways. Seeing that confusion was showing on Wuxi's face, he continued on. Helian Zhao's mind has since become like Sima Zhao's. At present, the Crown Prince's wings are not yet grown, and he cannot act. In the future, he gave a cold, light laugh. His face wasn't much obviously icier, but it made Wuxi's wide eyes open even wider. Eyes curving up as he smiled, Jing Qi went on. The war in Nanjiang wasn't at all the Emperor's idea, in fact. Do you understand? Wuxia had just been listening in a fog for half the day, but this sentence he understood. He momentarily grabbed Jing Qi's wide sleeve with anxiety. What are you saying? Jing Qi turned away and didn't look at him. You said that your clansmen have countless dead and injured. You must be hating our great Qing's people right now. I hate that I can't kill every last enemy here, Wuxia replied without a half bit of hesitation. Suffocated by this kid's undifferentiating honesty, Jing Qi coughed before he went on. Even so, our people have 400,000 dead. How many people is that? If one gathered all the dead bodies together into a pile, you wouldn't be able to see the top of them even if you craned your head back until your neck broke. Wuxia was still incensed. Jing Qi sighed. But why did we insist on fighting this war, Then, our Central Plains folk couldn't go live with you all over there. The journey is inconvenient, so frequently coming and going from there is out of the question. The Sky-High Emperor is far away, the Great Qing's officials can't control you, and your great shaman manages your kinsmen's affairs as ever. Would you say that the Great Qing has obtained any sort of benefit? Wuxia inevitably froze. That was the problem. He had wanted to understand the whole journey, but couldn't. Jing Qi's voice got all the more quiet, to the point where one could only see his lips trivially trembling, as if a big gust of wind was sweeping the sound away. Because the eldest scion wanted General Feng's power but he wasn't willing to give it to him, he had to think up a way to make him die. Wuxi was dumbstruck. A long while passed before he mumbled out a question. Then, your emperor, why did he agree? Jing Qi sighed. The Great Qing is so great, he doesn't know everything that goes on. Wuxi mutely followed behind him. By the time Chen Yuanshan came back and led them to the post house, he still hadn't yet come back to his senses. For the first time ever, he knew what the term "a raised foot carries weight" meant. One person, for the sake of getting something he wanted, could actually cause so many people to die without the least bit of care. And it was only because he was named as a big, high and mighty figure, and had power and authority. End of the chapter. Stay tuned for more BL.